My name is Jeff Anderson. I'm here today with my colleagues. Together, we represent 8 survivors of a priest currently in ministry on the Upper West Side at Notre Dame. 8 survivors abused by that priest over the years, from 1984 to 2002. We and the survivors have reported this to not just law enforcement, but to the Archdiocese of New York and the office of Tim Dolan. That priest, John Paddack, remains in ministry as we speak today. We came forward with that priest's name and disclosed him as an offender known to us first in 2012 to the Archdiocese, and then on February 21st, released a list called the Anderson List of priests who we knew had been publicly accused of childhood sexual abuse and who had worked in the Archdiocese of New York. That was February 21st, and there were 112 of them. And on that list, we identified John Paddack, Msgr. John Paddack. We also demanded his removal. Dolan continued him in ministry, then and to this day, a choice he made. Since that time, 7 other survivors have come forward with whom we're now working. Each of those reports have been made to the Archdiocese. And each time Dolan has continued to choose to have John Paddack, Msgr. John Paddack, in ministry. So we are here to sound the alarm about the present practice. This isn't about the past. This is about the present practice being employed by the top priest in the Archdiocese, Cardinal Archbishop Tim Dolan, and the choices and the perilous and reckless decisions he continues to make to choose secrecy and to hide what he knows to be a very dangerous situation. There is a second priest who we have identified here today that was also a serial offender, who serial offended in the early 1960s, who is now deceased. And why is it you speak of him today? Because there is a priest survivor, a victim of Msgr. George Murdoch, who is now deceased, recently came forward. And as a victim and as a survivor and as a priest, wanted the Archbishop, the Archdiocese, and people to know what had been done to him, because he had done his own investigation and learned that 7 of his classmates had been similarly abused by Murdoch. So we have 8 survivors of Paddack, and we have 8 known survivors of Murdoch. This priest who wrote this statement, a copy of which we've given you today, brought this to Tim Dolan and the Archdiocese. wanting them to reveal Murdack's name, wanting them to add him to their list of credibly accused, wanting to have a measure of his truth heard, known, and affirmed, and wanting to participate in the compensation program that Dolan set up for survivors. He did. And through that program, they hurt him worse than he had already been. And he wrote this statement out for people to know, not just that Murdack had abused 8 kids that he knows about that are still suffering in silence, but to demand that Murdack's name be added immediately to the list. And today, making the decision to release this statement so the public knows and other survivors can know that the present practice being employed by Archbishop Cardinal Dolan as it pertains to Paddack, as it pertains to Murdack, and the choice that he is making to keep neither on their list begs the question, how many more? How many more? All we do know is that when we released the Anderson list on February 21st, we identified 112 priests who've been publicly accused. 2 months later, Dolan released his list, and on it he had 126. So there is a perilous practice and a dangerous one as we speak. And one of those dangers that are imminent and present is John Paddack in ministry on the Upper West Side here in Manhattan. I stand with a very courageous survivor, Joseph Caramano. Joseph, step forward here, will you? And before I ask you to identify yourself and tell us why you're here, just by way of background, Joseph is one of the survivors with whom we are working. He's one of the survivors that has reported this information not just to us, but to the Archdiocese and law enforcement. And he can and could remain totally anonymous and a John Doe throughout all proceedings in which we're working with him. He made a choice to stand with us today. He made a choice to give his name and identify Paddack as his offender. And so with that background in mind, please, Joseph, identify yourself and tell us what makes you stand with us here today.
Thank you. I am Joseph Caramano. I'm 34 years old, and I am here because Father John Paddack should not be in ministry today. It's unfortunate that I have to come here, and I sometimes wonder what brought me here. Why did I have to do this? I didn't think I would be able to do this. I didn't think I would be able to tell anyone. But when I found out that after now 8 of us have come forward, and he's still in ministry in Manhattan, that something further had to be done. If that means me coming to you today and putting my name out there, putting my face out there, then so be it. I truly hope that by what we're doing here today, something is done. Something that should have been done a while ago. Something that I have faith in the words of the Cardinal that this would not happen anymore. But the actions speak differently than the words. So I just hope that this brings us all to a place where we can know and sleep safely at night knowing that he is not in the presence of children on a day-to-day basis.
Joseph Caramano, just stand please with us, and thank you for the courage of standing here today and for the reasons you choose to do this when you didn't have to. But you talk about the words of Cardinal Timothy Dolan, and I just need to share with you the words that he gave and expressed when he released the list after we released our list. And he said, both when we released our list on February 21 and then when he released his in April, that there is not a single priest or deacon of the Archdiocese of New York against whom there has been a credible and substantiated claim of abuse against a minor currently in ministry. Joseph, you and now 7 other survivors have reported your abuse by Paddack to Cardinal Dolan, and now this priest who is anonymous, who's a survivor, a victim of Murdoch, has reported to the same cardinal, Archbishop Dolan, that there's 7 other victims of him. And still, Murdoch, who's no longer alive, is not on the list, and more particularly, Paddack is still in ministry. With those words, how does that make you as a survivor having reported this to you?
I just wonder why, because it doesn't make sense to me. And maybe there's something that I'm not getting, but if you think about the words, they should match up to the actions. And I just don't understand why they don't.
We're going to come back to questions for you, if you don't mind a few, Joseph. And before I do, I think it's incumbent for me to share with you the statement of this priest who is abused by Murdoch so many decades ago, who came forward to Dolan so recently, because he uncovered 7 other victims and reported that and identified all that information to Dolan in February or earlier this year. And he wanted to have them hear him and believe him, and also have Murdoch added to the list of credibly accused. Dolan did not. And as he writes in this statement, having been abused for many years ago, he had never really told anybody but another priest in 1992. But then when the McCarrick disclosures came out in 2018, he identifies how he processed that. And he felt that he began to uncover other victims at that same place in Sacred Heart in Mount Vernon, and then decided he needed to come forward. And he trusted the victims' assistance compensation program set up by Dolan that would be for reconciliation and healing. And he went into that believing that. And then he identifies here, he gave them an 18-page dossier documenting and supporting and corroborating his experience. He went into that meeting alone, and then he identifies in the statement that he had felt ignored and they had betrayed his trust by sharing the information with others who should not have been, and that the promises made by them to him were broken. And that we had to report this to the district attorney. We don't know if they did. And that finally he asked and demanded and wanted that Murdoch be placed on the list, released by Archbishop Dolan of credibly accused. Dolan omitted that name. The very same thing that he has done and is doing involving Murdoch. He then asked for them to give him some measure of compensation. for the therapy and the harm that had been done by Murdoch. And in that, they issued an award of $100,000. And if he had accepted that, they would have required him to have kept that quiet, to have to remain silent, and thus he wrote this 6-page statement, because it's no longer a time for silence. It's no longer a time for deceit. It's a time for truth. And Joseph Caramano, it's time for you to have shared your truth, and it took a lot of courage to stand with us today. So Mike Reck, please stand forward. You're one of the lawyers working with us. You've been working with Joseph and many of the other survivors of Paddack and others. And because you became involved with this from the start, tell us what we need to know more about this and what brings us together.
Joseph, thank you. We're here today exposing this individual because Joseph Caramano is brave, because the other survivors who have come forward are brave. The timing of this is noteworthy. We're here today in 2019, but the Archdiocese has known about the allegations against Msgr Paddack for years, more than 6 years. Those allegations have been kept quiet by the Archdiocese. Just like the allegations against Father Murdoch have been kept quiet. Well, today is the time, and the timing is important. Back in 2012, another survivor, just like Mr. Caramano, came forward. He came forward, he reported to the Archdiocese the actions of Msgr Paddack. He reported to the district attorney the actions of Msgr Paddack. I was with him during that report those years ago. During that period of years, the Archdiocese allowed Msgr Paddack to continue in ministry with unfettered access to those who are unaware. In 2019, in March of this year, the Anderson report, this report put out by the Anderson firm exposed what the Archdiocese had been concealing. Since February of this year, survivor after survivor after survivor came forward, emboldened and empowered by the fact that Msgr Paddack's name was out there to tell their story. Each of the 7 survivors have reported to the Archdiocese and to law enforcement. And now we say, what more? The time is upon us for Cardinal Dolan to do the right thing and put the safety of New York's children first. And to those survivors who are still suffering in silence, some of whom are here today, speaking their truth, thank you. You are not alone. This was not your fault. You did nothing wrong.
Thank you, Mike Reck. Joseph, step up again. We're going to take some questions, and 2 things we're not going to be talking about today is the actual abuse and the details of that, other than Paddack would use the sacrament of confession to engage his victims, which is really grievous, and the harm that he carries and lives with, because it's personal. Because we're here today to expose the peril, the risk, the choice that's being made and has been made by Cardinal Dolan and the Archdiocese of New York City, and demand action, truth, and that the kids be protected. That the kids be protected. And so, with that in mind, let's take some questions, and then we'll proceed.
So you all have notified the Archdiocese of multiple allegations against Paddack. First of all, what has been their response? And secondly, what does this say to you about the way the Archdiocese is handling sexual abuse allegations?
Oh, the question is, we've notified the Archdiocese of multiple allegations against Paddack, and we have notified the Archdiocese of New York of now 7 separate reports of credible and believable detailed sexual abuse by Paddack of teenagers at various assignments beginning in 1984, continuing to 2002. And we have given them detailed statements and the reports in each and every instance. And what it says to us is that Archbishop Cardinal Dolan continues to make a choice. And the choice is to adhere to absolute secrecy and to protect the Archdiocese. And for some reason that I can't explain and only he can, this particular offender who is a serial offender. We also know that in the statement of the victim priest who has issued today regarding Monsignor George Murdoch, a similar circumstance has occurred because he identified himself and 7 other victims of Murdoch to Archbishop Dolan directly. And Archbishop Dolan, in that case, also chose to withhold the name of Murdoch from the list of credibly accused priests. So the question is why? There's no satisfactory answer to choose to put the reputation of the Archdiocese over the safety of the children, and that's something he'll have to answer to. But we're here to sound the alarm because this is not isolated. This has been a long-standing pattern and practice employed by Archbishop Dolan when he was in Milwaukee and I encountered him there, when he was in St. Louis when I encountered him there, and when he was assigned to New York when we've encountered him here repeatedly. So I wish I could say this was isolated because it's not. It's a pattern, it's a practice, it's a history, and it is designed to simply continue to do the wrong thing for the wrong reasons.
Yes,
Yes.
Mr. Camerano, when you went to the district attorney's office, what happened?
You want on my behalf, right?
I'm Mike Reck. I'm one of his lawyers. The district attorney's office has been notified in writing of the claims brought by Mr. Caramano, along with the 7 others. Because it occurred in multiple jurisdictions, multiple district attorney's office were notified of it. You'd have to talk to the district attorney as far as their reasoning. My understanding is that the statute of limitation, which is the time limit within which prosecution can occur, is a barrier for them.
But there was a new state law that lifts that you have a year, I believe, to report.
As of this time, reports have been made to all the law enforcement agencies regarding all the victims, including Joseph Caramano's report. As of this time, there has been no prosecution, and the reason given is statutes of limitations, and more explanation for that is for another day, but the reality is that so far, that's what we know. Our investigation continues, and we expect theirs will as well.
So are you filing a civil suit?
Yes, there is no question that we will be bringing suit on behalf of these courageous survivors under the Child Victims Act in the middle of August. But with a priest in ministry and these 2 guys not on the list as we speak, we cannot wait. And we're not going to allow another kid to be hurt by this guy and other survivors to be hurt by this practice being employed by Dolan. And that's why we stand today with a sense of urgency and purpose to sound this alarm. Any other questions? Final one. To all the survivors who have come forward, Joseph, stand here with us. To all the survivors that have come forward and share their secret with us, we pledge that we can and will continue to keep all the survivors with whom we work and their identities private and confidential as Jane Doe's and John Doe's as we proceed through this process. of exposure, ultimately litigation. And those few survivors that do choose to stand up and use their name as Joseph did is because he needed to, and he made that choice, as did Tom Davis. And Tom Davis, when we went public with that report on February 21st, you stood up for the first time, did you not?
Yes, I did.
And you identified your offender, did you not?
Yes, I did.
And you had been carrying that secret for decades, had you not?
Yes, I had.
And you stand with us today to demand the truth and action so the kids are protected.
Yes, which has not happened.
Has not happened.
It
Thank
has
you,
not
Tom.
happened.
Thank you, Tom Davis. Thank you, Joseph Caramano. And thank you to all the courageous survivors who have now a chance under the law in New York to have a voice and to take some action and to do what we can together to make sure the communities are safer and those that have been hurt so gravely can get some help, some healing, and have some hope and not have to carry these shameful secrets in silence anymore.
So I have a question. If there's a statute of limitations on criminal activity, is there any investigation if these priests are still active into current activity, if there is any, or shouldn't they be investigated?
Well, the question is, shouldn't they priests be being investigated? And the answer is, we do our own investigation, and all the investigation we do as survivors come forward, we turn over to the law enforcement agencies for their investigation. And there is a lot of ongoing investigation underway right now. There are attorney generals across the country and in this state doing an investigation as we speak, with whom we all are working. And that is an ongoing process. And the Child Victims Act, opening up the law for bringing civil action, is now given survivors permission to share these secrets with us and others. And we now have permission to share them with law enforcement. So there is a cleanup underway, but it's not at the top of the Archdiocese. It's in among the survivors and their courage and with the cooperation of law enforcement as we speak. Last final question.
Yeah, this is for Joseph and for Jeff. How does it feel to be one of several people that are coming forward now? What does this moment represent to you?
I never thought that I would have to come to this moment. I never thought this would have to happen. I thought that everything would be settled and he would be removed and that would be it. But, all this time that's gone by, the buildup, the momentum within myself, you can't sleep at night. You're having flashbacks and you wonder what can help. Well, I can say this has been a help for me, and I hope that it can inspire others to get that peace that they deserve as well.
Well, Joseph Caramano and the other survivors inspire us. Thank you for your truth and your courage. We are grateful, and we demand the removal of Paddack and any others who have been reported. And we demand that Dolan put the names of all those that he does know are offenders on that list, because he's got 126 on his list that he's reported. I expect that to be 5 times that number if the truth be told by him.
Did you ever get an answer as to why these two gentlemen are not on the list?
They have never given a satisfactory answer to us or to the survivors that reported it to Dolan. And there's been a mere deflection and denial, and in my view, deceit. And that has been the response that we have gotten.
And Ms. Caramano, did you report it to the diocese and you went through the whole procedure and the reconciliation?
No, he did not go through the reconciliation. He went through the process where he prepared the report, and it was given to the Archdiocese. So they have the reports, they have the details, and they have 7 others by survivors of Murdoch.
Now,
Excuse me, of Paddack.
What do they do with that now?
Well, what they're doing nothing. That's why we're doing something. So thank you. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you. Thank you.
Proud of you. Good job. You're a star.